Saddam Hussein was an Iraqi politician and dictator who served as the president of Iraq from 1979 until his overthrow in 2003. He was born on April 28, 1937, in Tikrit, Iraq. Saddam Hussein rose to power in the Ba'ath Party, a socialist political party in Iraq. During his presidency, he led Iraq through the Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War, and a series of UN sanctions. He was known for his brutal regime and human rights abuses, including the use of chemical weapons against his own people. Saddam Hussein was executed on December 30, 2006, for crimes against humanity. Saddam Hussein was born into a poor family in Tikrit, a small town in central Iraq. His father died when he was young, leaving his mother to raise him and his brothers. Saddam Hussein attended school in Tikrit and then moved to Baghdad to attend high school. He was expelled from school for political activities and later joined the Ba'ath Party, a socialist political party in Iraq. In 1959, he took part in an unsuccessful attempt to assassinate Iraq's prime minister at the time, Abdul Karim Qasim. After the failed assassination attempt, Saddam Hussein fled to Egypt, where he continued his political activities with the Ba'ath Party. He returned to Iraq in 1963, when the Ba'ath Party briefly came to power in a coup. However, the government was quickly overthrown, and Saddam Hussein was imprisoned. He escaped from prison in 1967 and rose through the ranks of the Ba'ath Party, eventually becoming its leader in Iraq. Saddam Hussein became the president of Iraq in 1979, following the resignation of his predecessor, Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr. During his presidency, Saddam Hussein developed a cult of personality, portraying himself as a strong leader who would restore Iraq to its former glory. He also implemented a series of economic and social reforms, including land reform, nationalization of industries, and increased investment in education and healthcare. However, Saddam Hussein's regime was characterized by authoritarianism, repression, and human rights abuses. He used the secret police, known as the Mukhabarat, to maintain control and suppress dissent. His regime was also marked by the use of violence, including the use of chemical weapons against Kurdish civilians in northern Iraq. One of the most significant events during Saddam Hussein's presidency was the Iran-Iraq War, which began in 1980 and lasted for 8 years. The war was fought over territorial disputes and religious differences between Iraq, a predominantly Sunni Muslim country, and Iran, a predominantly Shia Muslim country. Saddam Hussein believed that Iran was a threat to Iraq's national security and that the Iranian Revolution of 1979 posed a danger to the stability of the region. He launched a surprise attack on Iran in September 1980, hoping to quickly gain territory and force Iran to negotiate. However, the war turned into a prolonged conflict, with neither side making significant gains. The war was characterized by trench warfare, chemical weapons attacks, and the use of child soldiers. It caused significant human suffering, with estimates of between 500,000 and 1 million deaths. The war ended in a stalemate in 1988, with both sides agreeing to a ceasefire. Following the Gulf War, the United Nations imposed a series of economic sanctions on Iraq, aimed at forcing. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait, citing territorial disputes and economic grievances. The invasion led to the Gulf War, a conflict between Iraq and a coalition of international forces led by the United States. The war lasted for 6 weeks and resulted in Iraq's defeat. Following the Gulf War, the United Nations imposed a series of economic sanctions on Iraq, aimed at forcing the country to comply with disarmament obligations and prevent Saddam Hussein's regime from acquiring weapons of mass destruction. The sanctions had a devastating impact on Iraq's economy and led to widespread suffering among the Iraqi people. Saddam Hussein's regime continued to face challenges from both domestic opposition and international pressure. In 1991, Kurdish rebels in northern Iraq launched an uprising against the government, which was brutally suppressed by Saddam's forces. The United States and other Western powers established a no-fly zone over northern and southern Iraq to protect Kurdish and Shiite populations from further persecution. Throughout the 1990s, Saddam Hussein's regime was accused of supporting terrorism, developing weapons of mass destruction, and violating human rights. In 1998, the United States and Britain launched a series of airstrikes against Iraq in response to allegations that the country had failed to cooperate with UN weapons inspectors. In 2002, the United States accused Iraq of possessing weapons of mass destruction and argued that Saddam Hussein's regime posed a threat to international security. The U.S. and its allies began preparing for a possible military intervention in Iraq, while Saddam Hussein denied that Iraq had any weapons of mass destruction. In 2003, the U.S.-led coalition invaded Iraq and quickly overthrew Saddam Hussein's regime. Saddam was captured by U.S. forces in December 2003 and put on trial for crimes against humanity. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging, and was executed on December 30, 2006. The aftermath of the Iraq War and Saddam Hussein's execution has been marked by ongoing instability and violence in the country. The U.S.-led coalition faced criticism for its handling of the war and its aftermath, including the failure to establish security and stability in Iraq, the disbanding of the Iraqi army, and the lack of a coherent plan for reconstruction and political transition. Saddam Hussein's legacy is one that remains deeply controversial, with opinions varying widely on the man and his regime. Some argue that his regime was a stabilizing force in the Middle East, while others point to his brutal tactics and human rights abuses. On one hand, supporters of Saddam Hussein argue that he was a strong and charismatic leader who kept the country stable, secure, and united during his tenure. They credit him with modernizing the country's infrastructure, expanding access to education and healthcare, and providing a safety net for the poor. Many also contend that he was unfairly targeted by Western powers who sought to undermine Iraq's sovereignty and control over its natural resources. However, on the other hand, Saddam Hussein's rule was characterized by widespread human rights abuses and oppression. His regime was notorious for its use of torture, extrajudicial killings, and arbitrary detention. He ruthlessly suppressed political dissent and freedom of expression, leading to the deaths of thousands of Iraqis. Additionally, his pursuit of weapons of mass destruction and support for terrorist groups also drew international condemnation. The Gulf War and the subsequent economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations had a devastating impact on Iraq's economy and infrastructure, leading to widespread suffering among the Iraqi people. The sanctions also weakened Saddam Hussein's grip on power, as they limited his ability to obtain the resources needed to maintain his regime and its military capabilities. Saddam Hussein's overthrow and the subsequent instability in Iraq have also raised questions about the efficacy and consequences of foreign intervention in the region. The U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, based on the premise that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction, has been criticized as a costly and misguided venture that led to a protracted conflict and the deaths of countless Iraqis and American soldiers. The overthrow of Saddam Hussein also created a power vacuum that fueled sectarian tensions and allowed for the rise of extremist groups such as ISIS. In conclusion, Saddam Hussein's legacy is a complex and multifaceted one, with his supporters and detractors holding vastly different views of his rule and its impact on Iraq and the wider region. While some argue that his regime provided stability and prosperity, others point to his brutal tactics and human rights abuses. The Gulf War and the subsequent economic sanctions also had a devastating impact on Iraq's economy and infrastructure, further fueling the controversy surrounding Saddam Hussein's legacy. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and share the video with your friends.